Morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Interconnection Process Enhancements 2023 Track 2 Stakeholder Call to discuss the draft tariff language, which was posted on July 5th. My name is Elena Coppola-Alford, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating the web conference today. I'm joined by Bill Weaver, Assistant General Counsel, Infrastructure and Rates, and our other members of the I team here. And before we get started, I'm just going to go through a couple housekeeping reminders about this call being recorded for informational and convenience purposes. Any related transcription shouldn't be reprinted without the ISO's permission. These meetings are intended to be collaborative and stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives. Please keep your comments professional and respectful, and please try to be brief and refrain from repeating what's already been said so we can manage our time efficiently. If you need technical assistance during the meeting, please send a chat to the event producer. Today's event producer is Tegan. To raise your hands, first make sure that you have opened the participant and chat panels. Those are located on the bottom right of your screen, and then you'll be able to see other attendees, and you'll be able to see and input your information in the chat to ask questions. If you connected to your audio through your computer or use the call me option, you'll be able to see the raised hand icon at the bottom of the participant panel. If you dialed in outside of WebEx, you can press *3 to get into the question queue. And please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comment. And you can send your questions in the chat to me, Elena Coppola-Alford, or to all panelists. And here I'm going to hand it over to Bill Weaver, who's going to be sharing his screen.
Thank you, Elena. Before I share screen and start going through tariff, I will go through some general questions and just housekeeping items. Let's see, I think we received comments on the tariff provisions from about a dozen stakeholders, with some coming in as late as yesterday, but I was able to review everything in preparation for this call, and definitely very appreciative of the very careful feedback that we got. I think it's really going to help clarify and add a lot of precision to the tariff on these very important matters. If you have further thoughts, I don't expect that we will have another formal round of posting and asking formally for comments. There simply isn't time to do that. We will repost the revised tariff provisions next week once we've kind of finalized it internally based on your comments. And then if you, in reviewing that, if you see anything that's still sticky for you or anything new that you point out, please feel free to reach out to me directly, or if you just have questions, you can either call or email me. Many of you did that in preparation for these comments, and I think it really helped and appreciate it. There were certainly some issues of where confusion or clarification, centered on a few items that we were able to resolve before, but others had lingering. So I certainly encourage everyone to reach out to me. I'm available. I'll answer some general questions about this filing that have been popping up. First is, because the load serving entity requirements to submit their points occur October 1st, we will be filing at the end of this month, no later than August 1st to meet the federal Power Act requirements. So that's what's happening there. Contract management issues will be in a separate filing, and we will stakeholder their tariff provisions, subsequent to these ones, so probably in the August timeframe for seeing the tariff provisions, and then the filing would come a little later in the fall as we have time to discuss these things with FERC, which is very busy with the Order 2023 compliance filings, and then will be with this filing as well. but that's the pace there. We received several inquiries to discuss severability. We can have those conversations, but we're waiting to have more in-depth conversations with FERC first, because how we line up severability really is a question of where we view the risk and what those risks are, and those are informed based on our conversations with FERC and under the Federal Power Act. So I think it's still a little early to have those conversations. I think I will say at this point, it's certainly fair to expect a very high degree of severability within this filing, because we, have numerous components of a very complex filing, right, that aren't necessarily all dependent on one another. So severability is, a natural result of interconnection procedures, quite different from, market enhancements that really kind of do have to all work together necessarily. And then the other reason is that, we really need this to be approved for cluster 15 to go forward. And so severability will be a part of helping to ensure that result. I think the other thing that will really help is your support at FERC. The consequences of this not being approved will be dire, especially for cluster 15. So we certainly will appreciate and take careful note of supportive comments that you submit into the proceeding. So I'll make that ask, now in public. We will certainly appreciate them. We've all worked hard on this. I think everyone still has things, including us internally, that they might have liked to see it a different way or not. But we really want to move forward here and not let an elusive perfect be the enemy of the good here. And so we'll appreciate all the support with that goal in mind. Moving to the tariff provisions themselves, I guess I can open up that now. I think there was a lot of confusion, at least in some of the comments, about kind of what we were looking at and what was where. And that's perfectly understandable, because this was a natural result of the timing with the Order 2023 compliance filing and the IKE tariff provisions, right? The Order 2023 compliance filing came first, applies to cluster 15, has a May 17th effective date, even though, the approval date may be, way out, and a final approval, could be years out, because you generally have iterative compliance filings where you're still working on more and more issues, but it all tracks back to May 17th. And so the long and short of that is that, cluster 15 and most of these tariff provisions are taking place in Appendix KK, which is also known as the Resource Interconnection Standards, or RIS. I received a couple emails before people submitted comments, and definitely saw comments from stakeholders on this saying, what is the RIS? What is Appendix KK? What am I looking at? What is the GIA deposit or the commercial readiness deposit? I don't know what these things are. And that's because I think, as we put in a footnote, the base tariff is that pending Order 2023 Appendix KK for most of it. And that's because these tariff provisions are applying to cluster 15 immediately, but also will eventually apply to cluster 16. I think there's still some details to work out for cluster 16 and future clusters, but we have a very specific cluster 15 set of provisions, which, to kind of compound the challenges in keeping track of where everything is still in Appendix DD, simply because that's where it was before. So taking a look now, and I'll go through this with more specificity. I think most of these questions and confusions manifested around when interconnection customers in cluster 15 can make changes, specifically with regards to the point of interconnection. So we'll try to definitely try to tighten that up and make it a little more obvious for everyone. Now, because we received so many comments, and most of those comments, built around very similar issues. You may see that we've corrected it in a way or added language in a way that that addressed your issue or tried to, but wasn't maybe the way you suggested. And that's because, either I thought there was a better way of doing it, or another stakeholder had suggested a very similar fix. And so I had the ability to, look at everyone's suggested fixes and take them. So what we're looking at today is, you'll see on my screen, I guess, which is your screen, the red indicates the delta from what was posted previously and what you submitted comments on, and that'll be based on stakeholder comments. As I said before, we'll repost the delta next week so you can review, but it helps on this call to go over, what we're already agreeing on as areas where we can improve. Okay, so this is Appendix A with defined terms. One thing that, a few stakeholders commented on that I think is perfectly reasonable was, that we probably could benefit from more precision around, I think, two aspects, which were what it means to have deliverability in a transmission zone or merchant zone. I've highlighted this just to indicate, I think we're still thinking about this, and you might see it tightened up a little more next week. And then the other issue is with subzonal constraints. I want to work with the engineers a little more to have good language there. So you're not going to see that, but it's something I'm definitely thinking about. Let's see. So I'll just start going through the iterative changes and summarize stakeholder comments as I go through this, what we're thinking about, but otherwise assume that everyone understood the intent and didn't have issues on issues that weren't controversial based on the comments. Normally, I like to call out and say, oh, 6 cities suggested this, Vistra suggested this, LSA suggested this. But because, I don't know, there were so many comments, especially around the same issues, I'm not certain I remember. So I think I will just use the general stakeholders throughout this call. Let's see. So we will tighten up that a little bit with the zones. I will make a general housekeeping note too that like I've tried to zoom in on my screen, but if you look at the top of your WebEx, you should have the ability to zoom in or out to see the Microsoft Word better on your screen too. And apologize if anyone is getting nauseated as we go through this. It's often the result of tariff calls, which are nauseating regardless of screen sharing. Okay, that was a lawyer joke, but anyways, I think I saw Susan have her hand up if we want to stop here before we get into tariff.
Yeah, hi, this is Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Hi, Bill. Just a question on the definitions. If you mind scrolling back up. We had suggested for the deliverable option that only applies to projects that are not only interconnecting in a deliverable zone, but that are actually seeking deliverability. So the deliverable option doesn't apply to energy-only interconnection. So it's not just anybody seeking an interconnection, it's only seeking an interconnection with deliverability. So, again, just a clarification here, but it's probably a useful one because there's a lot of, I think it goes under the deliverable option, that one there. So it's an election by any customer to interconnect seeking deliverability in a deliverable zone.
Yeah.
It doesn't apply to energy only. There's a lot of energy only things. I know that those energy only proposals came late in the process, and so I think just some of the other things that we suggested were things like reimbursement option, non-reimbursement option, those kind of things probably should also be added to the definitions here so that, just even going through the definitions, you can kind of understand how all of this will fit together.
Yeah, I definitely saw that in your comments. I think, I don't know, sometimes more defined terms can help. Sometimes they can, cause as many problems as they try to solve. Yeah, we'll take that into account and consider it more. I think one thing before I get out of the definitions, there were several requests to define distribution factor. And as I was looking at Appendix A, where we keep the definitions, there are already several different types of distribution factor definitions that are competing. And I thought adding yet another one, because it didn't seem like either generation distribution factor or power transfer distribution factor was the perfect fit, and adding another one would be more confusing. I simply described that, what we mean by distribution factor in the tariff. So we'll see that later, and that's always an option as well.
Yeah, again, that's anytime you can put that stuff in the defined terms. We really do find it quite useful, without having to search through all the universe of the tariff to find those things. If what you really want is what do they mean by defects, you really should be able to look in one place for that. Also, and with respect to and totally separate subject, with respect to the earlier thing you talked about with Order 2023, and it is quite maddening to have to float back and forth between the current tariff and then the Order 2023 tariff and then this tariff. There's some plan somewhere along the way to put those together or apply, put things in for reference or some other stuff. Anyway, it just would be really helpful to do that, because the flipping around into different sources is a little frustrating trying to understand everything.
Yeah, I think no one on earth knows that better than me, Susan. And we definitely heard that. And I think Grid Assets is working on developing on the generator website, so you can get off like the legal pages, just like a working pending universal draft to making it easier to navigate. So hopefully we'll get that up and running soon.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so because we only had Appendix DD when we originally started making unique procedures for Cluster 15, we've kept that there. And so the changes about Cluster 15 schedule really still reside here in Section 17 of Appendix DD, the GIT app. One thing per a lot of comments, we've really tightened up, just trying to clarify when and how you can make POI changes, and that is in that October 1st to December 1st window within the same transmission zone and participating TO, because I think there might be one or two transmission zones that actually have multiple participating TOs. So that should be more clear and consistent with the policy, as we've said.
No, we do have one more hand in queue.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. Well,
the next. Yeah, Tegan, let's go to the next hand. Dinesh, go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. This is Dinesh Selam Natarajan with EAS Energy. My question is much simpler than Susan's. I'm trying to follow through your document, and I'm using the version posted on June 26th or dated June 26th. Is that the same version, or is this a different one?
This is a different one. Yeah. So this is like a little different than, the policy call is paper call, comments, new paper. What we do for the tariff is I like to, we posted the first set of revisions. Your comments were due Monday. I start reading them and incorporating them immediately. And then what you're seeing is the delta based on, your comments, my collection, of those comments and how we synthesize them here. So that we can already, basically the point of this call is to say, I already agree with, a lot of what you guys said and what you did, and then add a little more based on this call, then repost so you guys can, re-review and submit anything else to me directly based on, it's like, okay, they did what I suggested or they disagree. So yeah, this what you're seeing, only I have.
Okay, so this is the delta.
You'll have this next week.
So this is the delta between what was posted and the additional revisions you started to incorporate based on comments.
That's right. Yeah. So the red is new, and the blue is what was posted.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. That's helpful for me to track. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to Vineet. Go ahead.
Hi. I think in terms of the change of POI, if I remember correctly, the proposal was only to limit change of POI within transmission zone, but not PTO. I think that's something we probably not need to follow up on. Would there be like a comment period once you post the updated language?
No, as I said at the top, like there isn't time for a second full round based on when we have to file. But if you still have an issue that you think that we have wrong or could have better, just email me or call me directly. Yeah, I think for future clusters, that participating TO limitation certainly makes a lot of sense, because the idea is, well, you can only get feedback on your POI from that transmission owner that's initially doing the validation and reviewing and looking at the other interconnection requests that are nearby. And the idea is that they can provide feedback to align the POI to improve all of the interconnection requests, make them all more efficient for everyone. Here with cluster 15, a little different case, because you're getting new information based on the zones. So I'll take that back to the team, and about the PTO issue for cluster 15.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, because when I read through it, it has like a 2024 October 1 through December window, which I assume is related to cluster 15. So.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I will reiterate, though. I think there are very few transmission zones that have multiple participating TOs where this would even make a difference. But understood. Okay. So moving on, and
we got one last hand. Sorry, Bill, I was waiting for. We have one last hand from Eddie.
Yes, Bill, interested to know your thoughts on the POI within the same PTO, and then you have a substation and different PTOs connected. Does it include the substation as well?
It sounded like you were calling from ham radio. I'm not sure I made it out. I think the question was where you have a substation with multiple owners, right? One of these like co-owned facilities. Whether you'd be limited to a PTO then, or whether someone could say no, you need to dance around the substation for XYZ reason. Let's see. I think that's a good question. Let me take back. Let me take that back if that was the question, and we'll think about this limitation for cluster 15.
Yes.
And then there was
that's a question, and also if you could explain in the tariff about the projects that are outside California, whether they have a choice of moving with one interconnection, and if so, how?
I mean, being outside of California, I guess I'm not sure quite, and I think I saw that in one set of comments, quite how that impacts, because ultimately first, yeah, I recognize that the CAISO is mostly in California, but we really don't think of the state per se. All we're looking at is, your point of interconnection to the CAISO controlled grid, regardless of what state that's in or what state you might be coming from. So all of this with POI and transmission owner really just pertains to, your point of interconnection to the CAISO controlled grid. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but if you have more, specific questions about a specific project that is in XYZ location, feel free to reach out to me or to Grid Assets. We can walk through, specific concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And we had a question in the chat that was also related to Vinit's question. I don't know if this got answered. Is the intent to allow POI changes for cluster 15 anywhere in the PTO service territory or just within the zone where the original POI request was entered?
The limitation would be for, I guess, both, you know, within the zone and within the PTO. Yeah, you wouldn't like, yeah.
Okay, and then we have one last hand, Susan Schneider.
Hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I just a quick one on the PTO. That PTO restriction is a brand new thing that was not in the final proposal. And I think in the areas, you're talking about, it is only a few, but it will really severely restrict the POI restrictions or the POI changes for the projects that are, say, attached to a PTO that only has a couple or three, you know, very few POIs within that zone. So I do think that it's a pretty important one for those few areas where it will apply, and it is something brand new. So I think we would really have an issue with that.
Okay, well, definitely heard this concern, and we'll take it back.
Okay, thanks very much.
Let's see. Okay, so I think we've gone past POI. This is, again, cluster 15 specific. Let's see, and remember, because I'm the one screen sharing, right? I can't see chat comments, or I rarely see hands going up. I have a big monitor and everything's way in the corner. But anyways, I think I had this arranged original. There's no substantive change here, but I had it by section number, just because as a lawyer, that's how I think. And someone said this is reverse chronological. You should switch those, and that's fine. Okay, so now we're in Appendix KK, the RIS, Resource Interconnection Standards. And here, especially in these early sections, like Section 3, you're seeing some things that, you know, apply to cluster 15, but a lot of things that are really having future clusters in mind. You know, particularly, you know, for them, it'll be that they're working on POI changes 10 days after the cluster application window, namely that period where they have a complete interconnection request. The validation process has started with the CAISO and the PTO, and before the screening process starts, because obviously once the screening process begins, the POI has to be locked down. Let's see, okay, so I'll just move on here. There were several comments about scoping meetings. Let me remove this. There we go. There were several comments about scoping meetings saying, how is this going to happen in a scoping meeting? We like the old scoping meetings. You know, the CAISO needs to identify a replacement for scoping meetings. I certainly understood all those comments, and, you know, and don't find them unreasonable. Ultimately, however, you know, this was the Order 2023 change that FERC made, very considered based on comments, understanding that the much faster timelines FERC wanted to prioritize would not be possible with individual scoping meetings or study results meetings. As valuable as those meetings were, you know, FERC erred on the side of making things go faster. And so that's why there is this one scoping meeting. The provisions in here are from FERC's pro forma large generator interconnection procedures. And so this is what we have, and this is what we'll live with for the time being. You know, it could be that we'll see how these go for cluster 15 or future clusters, and then see if we need to develop something different. But it's what we have for now. And scoping meetings, you know, weren't part of IPE, so I'm not really going to change them here, especially as the 2023 compliance filing is pending. So the one thing that we think is critical, to just contradict what I just said, is that we want to at least have the scoping meetings rather than the entire cluster, which is what FERC envisioned. We want to at least break this down by the transmission zone and the cluster study criteria. So what you're seeing is probably, I guess, three scoping meetings per transmission zone. One would be for everyone seeking deliverability. They're all either going to be merchant or they're all will be deliverable. And then the two types of energy only, if there are any, in a different transmission zone. Simply because they'll be going over different criteria.
In the chat when you have a good breaking point. We have a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah, so that's what we have for scoping meetings. And yeah, we can go ahead and go to questions here.
And I think this one was from about 5 minutes ago, so a few slides back, from Virginia Thompson. For the definition of merchant transmission, it states merchant transmission CRRs for network upgrades, but without any guarantee of deliverability. Shouldn't merchant projects that fund the upgrades receive guaranteed deliverability?
Merchant transmission CRRs are, first of all, like, yeah, Yelena, and I'll say this to stakeholders, let's not use the chat feature to ask comments like to me or the group, because it's really jumping the queue. And use the raise hand feature if you want to ask a question or raise an issue. If you're just like saying something is available in the chat or making a clarification, that's fine. But otherwise, let's try to keep that out of the chat. But see, now going back up, let's see. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand Virginia's comment, but the deliverable option does not have a quote unquote guarantee of deliverability. What you're seeing here is, even though someone chooses, maybe this is the confusion, even though someone chooses the deliverable option, right, and they can get cash reimbursement, they still need to go through the TPD allocation process to get deliverability. They also, even though no one's ever done this, but in their GIA, they still have the election at the end of the day to say, I don't want cash reimbursement for my DNUs or my RNUs, and I want to receive merchant transmission CRRs pursuant to Section 36 of the tariff instead. So that's maybe all the things you're seeing in that definition. This is why definitions can be problematic. They're dense and really it's like the tariff revisions that where you really want to spell all these things out. Okay, but I think you said there were more hands up, more questions. Maybe these get back to scoping meetings.
The other question that was in there, I don't know if this would relate to what you're saying, but will there be one results meeting per zone or individual results meeting?
Yeah, I think I answered that. There will not be individual results meetings. That was well debated and decided in order 2023.
Okay, and there's currently no hands raised.
Okay, thanks. Okay, moving into scoring. Let's see, I think one stakeholder noted that really like the load serving entities are dependent on kind of getting the list of interconnection requests from the CAISO first, and that should be the start of their clock rather than when the window closes. We should get them their list as soon as the window closes. So hopefully this makes no substantive difference, but I otherwise agreed and thought, yeah, we'll change the trigger for them, not to create a compliance obligation that that we could impact negatively in the event of something, I don't know, especially if they fall on the wrong days or something. Let's see, kind of semantic changes here, rather than say prepare interconnection requests, really to inform the preparation of them. We received a few comments in different places that came of a similar variety. Some were saying, this is local regulatory authority, you should add CPUC here. Some things said CPUC. People were saying you should add or make this local regulatory authority. Collecting all those comments and thinking about it a little more closely, I think we're looking at the final proposal. I'll first note that the CPUC is a local regulatory authority, right? Obviously, it's the biggest in the CAISO and in California, but there are other local regulatory authorities, and I think generalizing the tariff terms to simply specify local regulatory authority, even though in a lot of instances we know the CPUC might be the only one, really is more consistent with a Western-wide CAISO and a tariff, and also avoids confusion when there are multiple local regulatory authorities who have an impact in the tariff process. So you'll see that change. It's not that we're trying to de-emphasize the CPUC or any value. It really is just more consistent with a general tariff practice of saying local regulatory authority. Okay, I think I saw a hand come up.
I don't see any raised hands. Susan, did you have a question? There were some hands that were kind of fluttering up and down, and there's currently not one right now.
Okay. Let's see.
Wow, yeah, that was great.
Where's your hands? Okay. I think here's something in the background, but that's okay. We'll keep going. Cluster study criteria. I think several stakeholder comments said, maybe we could use more preamble here. Could you remind it, say what the criteria are? Some people suggested lists, bullets, whatever. This is what the result was. I think interconnection requests, this isn't really so much this is just for consistency. I think saying customer request isn't always doesn't have a significant impact. They are one and the same: project, request, customer. There were several comments saying we would like more data with two regards. First was on the screens themselves, and second, specifically on the auction. And so, you don't have to review this in real time. We'll post this next week, but we saw those comments, we reviewed the final proposal, we talked about it internally to some extent, and we've certainly revised the tariff language to try to leave open the door that, yes, we will be publishing more aggregate data. The intent here wasn't to foreclose the option of publicizing aggregated data on what screens are working, even what aggregated scores we're seeing or anything like that. What we were trying to address was, some other concerns we're saying, where interconnection customers, developers are saying, everything I submit is confidential, right? And that is confidential. At no point is the CAISO going to publish an individual interconnection customer's points or what screens were determinative to it, except to the interconnection customer itself. We will tell you what was decisive in there. So try to do two things in these revisions. One is solidify the confidentiality of individual data, but either leave open the possibility, make clear that we can publish composite aggregated data. And then we've also added some specific things, especially in the auction section, where we think, oh yes, this actually should be written that we will publish it XYZ, but we'll get to that below. Because we certainly agree with stakeholders that we all want to be able to review this data to determine how well any screen is working. There's confusion here, not so much confusion, but calls for more precision about so many criteria, so many points and subpoints. So kind of refer to these as steps rather than criterions. Here, and I think this is the most critical place where someone sees, distribution factor. I've added the definition of distribution factor. This is consistent with what we've said in the paper is the distribution factor. It's also the definition of distribution factor that we use today in the deliverability assessment. So there shouldn't be any surprise here about what it is or what it says. There were some little calls about how to specify when customers are tied, and that is, I'm trying to call out really kind of substantive, interesting changes rather than just semantic changes or more precise language. But so one more substantive change you're seeing here was, first, I think there were a few comments that said, where did this 150% load serving full allocation limit come from? That was in the revised final proposal, discussed quite a bit, and then it was in the final proposal, I think on page 48, saying this was that. I think there wasn't much comment on it, which why you didn't see it really reiterated at length in the final proposal, but it was there, and part of the policy. I think it's a critical piece of it too. But that was there, not creating anything new here. One thing though that that you'll see in this revised tariff revisions is that we've also clarified that the load serving entities not only can share points, but when they're allocating points the normal way, but they can also combine their demand if they want to share full allocations for a larger project. I mean, this makes a lot of sense and is consistent with the policy if you're imagining, small, contiguous load serving entities. It could make a lot of sense for them to say, well, it's like, well, we want to collectively share, one bigger project that can meet our collective needs. That's fine. You can do it this way as well, in addition to just combining or sharing points. There was also several comments on the full allocation. Let's see here at the top about making it clear that it really is an election. It's not that you necessarily have to be, that the project has to be too big for you, or that it has to be that project that's too big. Any load serving entity, regardless of size, can also decide to not use, their specific points for XYZ and just make one full allocation to a project, regardless of its size, whether it's, bigger than the load serving, more points than the load serving entity, or fewer points. They could just want to do one and give it the full election. That's fine. I clarified the language to say, you can do that. Let's see. There's a discussion here about what did this mean, authorized to execute power purchase agreements. That comment made sense, and I also don't think the way this was written was enforceable from the CAISO perspective. Like, I don't know how we're going to verify someone is actually authorized to execute power purchase agreements. So just softened it a little. Switch this just to counterparty because we were using counterparty and off-taker interchangeably, which is not always helpful.
We do have one raised hand from Loic.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi there, just Bill talking on that points. And we understand the challenge you're raising as it relates.
Sorry, can you state your name and affiliation first?
Loic from Southern California, Edison. Bill, I understand the challenge you're raising around confirming that somebody is authorized to execute PPA. I mean, the concern of an authorized representative, it's not defined. It seems to be a low bar. It seems to be something that anybody is able to sign. I mean, there's no definition standard involved there. I think the intent of this authorized to execute a power purchase agreement was to raise that bar. So I don't know if there's another mechanism to get there that allow the ISO to still be able to confirm that that entity has that level of authority, but I'm still concerned with the language as is that seems to be, not defined and give any employee of such a corporation the ability to sign that document.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think we share that concern. I think it is a challenge with non-load serving entities, corporate entities, as it were. The CAISO works very hard to try to verify that these companies, are legitimate and that the people are authorized. I think ultimately, like this change was simply about the signatory. I don't think we have rather than the company itself, but certainly happy to hear other suggestions because this is an issue we care about because these non-load serving entities are tricky for us to verify.
Bill, at least can they attest in that authorization, in that affidavit, can they attest formally that they have the authority to execute a PPA? So you don't have to verify that they can attest of such at a minimum.
Yeah, that is a possibility. I thought of that as well. Okay, let me take that back and we'll discuss it internally. But yeah, certainly understand your concerns.
Thanks.
Okay, we don't have any other hands or chat questions.
No, thanks. I was just making a note. Okay, so I think we left off at subpoints for project viability. Yes, there was one good comment saying this was not quite precisely written, where per the final proposal, it is 50% complete would get you all 50 points. So rather than saying like scale up to based on the plan is complete, added each percentage is essentially a point up to that 50 subpoints for an engineering plan. There were, let's see, this might come later, but I remember too that there was a question on, oh, right, that really, it does not have to be the interconnection customer's attestation or the interconnection customer's professional engineer. Probably a lot of these will be consultants or outsourced. And so remove that to clarify, yes, like you can have a completely separate entity verifying your engineering plan's completeness. There's a set of comments on what does it mean to be under active construction. Now here we have a good already defined term, and so rather than using this language, I simply referred to that, which is commenced construction activities. Also this is a demarcation that I think developers and the CAISO and the PTOs are all familiar with because it is a very critical demarcation for when your interconnection financial security postings become non-refundable, and that's the commencement of construction activities, which is defined in the tariff as engineering procurement or essentially expending funds toward an ultimate construction, and those are specified in the GIAs. Okay, so change that. Let's see, or clarified it, I should say. Same thing here, construction activities. Yep, and I was going to say, yeah, rather than saying seeking, rather than qualifying as seeking, let me just finish project viability. Yeah, I think everything else here was kind of semantic, with one exception, which was there were a few comments saying that the final proposal noted that if you are a long lead time resource, that does not require additional transmission capacity, namely like the transmission capacity is already there and can accommodate you, then also you would meet this last, I guess, criterion for being a long lead time gives a needed resource for system need. So I added that as well. That is in the final proposal. So thank you for those comments. Okay, that was the 3 sets of points. Stop here for questions.
Eddie, go ahead.
Yes, Eddie, actually, actually, the construction grade design. Just want to make a clarification that I've already checked it, but it does not include the Gentie. The construction level design is only the power plant. The reason for that is that the Gentie, we don't want to do the construction level design until we do the permitting and figure out what the job is going to take, you know, which street is going to pass and so on. So I just want to make that clarification.
Okay. If you, why don't you email me that one just so I have it, because I'm not sure I'm the expert on that or how that always works. And yeah, if you could send that concern offline, we'll take it back to the team.
Okay. We'll do it.
Thanks.
Okay, we don't have any other.
I don't feel confident that my note will capture your concern, and don't want to have to just go back to the recording of this to figure it out. Okay. Load serving entity points. I think there were a few comments around the same theme saying this might not necessarily be the load serving entity's specific website. So I tried to make and I guess, yes, I guess it could be a third-party website used by the load serving entity. That's fine. Ultimately, it needs to be that. There were also concerns about whether saying, like, what does it mean to be a public website, you know, and so we tried to add more precision around there, saying, you know, registration, NDAs, things like that. Ultimately, it's whether it's publicly accessible is what we're looking for here. No, I guess, artificial hurdles to accessing the website and what's on there, right? We want sunshine to be the best disinfectant and have these criteria or determination factors, consideration factors out there. But please, you know, review this, and if, especially those load serving entities who are going to do this, have tweaks that they envision, you know, please keep sending those in. Happy to consider. There are a few comments about kind of the repeated, okay, it's like, well, over here you're not going to redistribute, over here you're not going to redistribute. I understood the intent, but it might have been a little confusing, whatever. I tried to synthesize those comments into just saying it once at the end rather than twice. We're not going to, no matter how you don't get points or don't use points, we're not going to redistribute. I think everyone understands that rule, but you know, it's a matter of capturing it in the tariff. This got maybe probably the most comments all around the same theme. No one, you know, worked up or no vitriol, but saying, you know, that this could be written more precisely where it is the greater of these two, and this should be or not and, going back to our, you know, disjunctive logic. So I made those, you know, agreed with the comments. Hopefully that satisfies everyone on the load serving entities awarding themselves points per interconnection request or based on capacity. Let's see, adding here that auction is really after the screens and then the, oh, sorry, oof, this was, all right. There was a moment where I thought about using power transfer distribution factor, but the engineer said, no, not that one. Okay, still tied. And then, yes, there were several comments saying no one has to submit a bid, right? And that's, of course, you know, you could withdraw at any point. If you're notified you're in auction, you may submit a bid, But obviously, if you don't, you're not going to win the auction and you will be out. Let's see. There was also, I think we noticed internally that the auction deposit is not the product of the interconnection customer's specific bid and its capacity. It's the clearing price. It's the lowest winning bid in that transmission zone that sets the auction deposit for everyone that wins the auction. Okay, but it's still based on you, the interconnection customer's capacity, not the winning bid's capacity. Okay. Let's see. There were several comments for precision around commencement of cluster restudy. This also happened up above with the discussion of the customer engagement window, that we added more precision around when these things commence rather than, I think it was a little vague and just saying when, when the cluster restudy happens. Yeah, when it starts. All of those are very tight deadlines in the Order 2023 world, so it's not, it shouldn't make a substantive difference, but a little more precise language. Same thing here. It's really, saying not simply before the study, but before the study commences. Words. So yeah, there was very little comments on the merchant. Getting into energy only requests for cash reimbursement. Let's see. Oh, right. So there were comments on this saying, it's like, we're not seeing so much of what you said here, or why is there a load serving entity point provision here, but not the rest of the provisions there? And that's because, what we're trying to do here for the energy only is incorporate by reference the deliverable option screening process, saying you're doing everything they're doing, but here is how it's going to work for you. It's going to be, only energy only customers against each other, and the tiebreaker is a little different. And then what we've tried to clarify too is that load serving entities receive their points for energy only projects a little differently. And so that's the intent there. The number of substantive changes, just clarifying the difference. Really, this provision is only trying to say the delta between energy only and the merchant, but otherwise incorporate, deliverable projects, not merchant, but otherwise trying to incorporate the deliverable screening procedures. And same thing here, the load serving entities otherwise are complying with 4.1.1 in terms of what they publish on the website, et cetera, but their difference in how they get points. And then same thing here with the matching language for how they can award points to affiliated entities for energy only projects. Clarifying here that the energy only without cash reimbursement option is anywhere. It's not merchant or transmission zone, TPD zone specific. I think that takes us through, I guess, a lot of the most critical issues here. A lot of the rest of these, what you're seeing is a combination of two things happening with the tariff provisions that discuss network upgrade options. Number one is, we're changing the names from option A, option B to deliverable and merchant option. Number two is kind of we're moving things around based on the new options. And I guess number three, so you're using three things, is we are discussing what happens when you've chosen those options. That's a little different than the option A and option B function today. So there's some confusion there, and it's not understandable. Several comments on oh, so everything here, I would say, almost everything here is old language from existing tariff, simply changed into the new terms. This provision, you know, I think I agreed with comments that it got a little redundant based on the, you know, I think 2023 compliance filing, where, you know, often what we're doing is adding to a similar provision what FERC's pro forma language is, or it could also be that, you know, FERC's pro forma language does, you know, very legally kind of make the same points very similarly, if not different, but tried to clarify this so it's not kind of very repeating very specific language, but otherwise striking this idea that, and this is not modifications generally, this is really before the end of the customer engagement window, that the POI could change. Now, this is just a tariff, I guess, precision language where this issue is being, this language is being repeated twice. Certainly we don't intend to and are not removing the ability for the PTO to provide feedback during the validation period saying, you know, the POI should go a little this way or a little that way to optimize it. It's just that this language is really redundant throughout and we're trying to tighten it up. And then same thing here on, this got a little problematic in the modification section because again, these are prior to the end of the customer engagement window, which is, you know, the validation period before the cluster study starts, what used to be the phase 1 study, taking out the change in point of interconnection, not because that's not happening, simply because it's confusing to have this here as the customer engagement window. What's really is it's when the screening process starts, the POI has to be locked down for obvious reasons. So this is simply just an organizational issue, like where and how this appears in the tariff, but without really a policy change. You know, PTOs can still give feedback on POI. You still have a period to get that feedback and change your POI before the screening process starts. And obviously, you know, those conversations can happen before the cluster application window opens as well. Hopefully that clarifies a lot of the comments. Yeah.
Hi, yeah,
Susan, go
Susan
ahead.
Schneider. Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I'm just confused about 6.7.2.1 because the language that's there, that first part, the first sentence was not stricken, I don't think, in the draft and the posted language. So it looks like you just stricken that. That seems like actually very beneficial language to have and should still apply. So I don't understand why you're taking that out. And then the language at the end, why that would come out. I guess I'm not, what's the rationale for saying that that any of the three entities involved here can't suggest changes or identify changes that would be beneficial, and that those changes should be incorporated if they're acceptable to everybody? So I don't understand why you would take this language out in either case.
Yeah, let me think about the end of, as I tried to just convey, the intent here is not to make substantive changes or remove that ability, these rights, these things happening. And several stakeholders, you know, wanted these things struck for what I was talking about, whereas this language is being repeated in multiple places in the tariff in section 3, and then again here in section 6.721 and 6.722. Right. All we're trying to clarify, and when it happens multiple times, it's confusing, you know, what it is or when it's supposed to happen, and we're trying to, you know, have it more be in that section 3 section about, you know, these things are happening in the customer engagement window. I don't even think people are, you know, often when people come to 6.7.2, they're talking about a modification, you know, a material modification assessment that's way down the line. but, you know, certainly happy to, you know, think about this more.
Well,
and yeah.
I can see the first sentence is redundant with the second sentence, so I could kind of see that one. But the last one, why would you take that? I guess I don't understand why you would take that out. If just to say, well, people can identify changes, well, that's great. But wouldn't it be made good if they could actually implement them, which is kind of what that last sentence does?
Yeah.
And then take out the last part. Yeah, that last part should come out.
Yeah.
But the rest of it should stay in, because identifying the changes doesn't mean anything if you're not actually going to make them.
Yeah. Okay. Let me take that back and think about it. I think
Okay.
I think that could be it. There were a lot of comments on this provision. I want to make sure I'm looking at everyone's, and not just the last one I heard, because a lot of people felt strongly about this provision repeating itself and conflicting with Section 3.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'll take that back. Thanks, Susan.
Okay, really appreciate it. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat saying if a QC 15 project is at a POI.
Sorry, Yelena, let's just.
Do you want me to not read that?
Yeah, let's just use raised hands.
Oh, I'm not sure if everyone
have
can.
Questions.
Okay,
okay.
so our
Well,
next hand is from Eddie.
Yes, the modification is extremely important for developers. And it was kind of confusing for me to read through section 6.7.1 and 6.7.2. And I noticed that you crossed out item E, which is changing point of interconnection. I just, want to make sure that the developer still has a chance to change its point of interconnection after the phase 1 study, and that is preserved.
Yes, yeah, as I said, that still occurs, but what we have is a competing, and we have this reiterated in Section 3 and in Section 6.7. And the intent is not to take away that option, it's simply to say that this is not an option that persists all the way through the end of the customer engagement window. That option, per the language in Section 3, has to, be finalized before the screening process starts, which is, I think, we've said 10 days within the validation period.
In cluster 15, two options, if I understand it correctly, based on what you're saying, is that you can change your point of interconnection before you can get into the study or validation, and that understand. Also, the phase 1 study, system impact study, whatever you want to name it, you still have the option of changing interconnection.
Yes, I mean, these provisions are only about these things that are occurring within the customer engagement window. We're not otherwise changing future modification possibilities.
I just would mention that's please. Thank you.
Okay, wait, one more hand. Virginia, go ahead.
Myself, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Virginia Gross with Southern California Edison. So I'm trying to understand when the screening process begins. So I think I heard you, Bill, said that the screening process starts 10 days after the close of the interconnection request application window. Is that correct?
That's correct, although, and I'll clarify here that what we're really talking about now is like cluster 16, right? Future
Yeah, that's
clusters.
right. Yeah, cluster 16 and beyond. So you're saying that 10 days after, October 15, right? Then that's when the screening process begins. So that's correct, right? For cluster 16 and beyond?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
And so 10 days after the close of the interconnection request window, the POI cannot change. Is that correct?
Well, as Eddie pointed out, there are still, I guess, abilities to enhance your POI later, per study results. But for, obviously once the study starts, and through the screening process and at least the cluster study, yeah, the POI will be locked in, for study purposes for some time. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm trying to understand what happens during the customer engagement window. I'm on the other side of the house, so this is kind of new to me. So during the customer engagement window, at that point, the deliverability status cannot change, right? So once the application window closes for the interconnection request, so October 15, the deliverability status request cannot change. Like one cannot, developers can go change their deliverability status request. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. And my last question is, and during the customer engagement window, is it possible for a developer to change, let's say, technology or change configuration, or is that kind of locked in once you start the customer engagement window?
Not once you start. A lot of those options that you see here in 6722 are still available.
Okay. So yeah, so changing megawatt and change configuration. I see that now. Okay, great. Well, great. Thank you very much for the clarification. I appreciate it, and thanks for all the work you've done on this.
Yeah. Thank you, Virginia. I'll make a general point too, which is something we've discussed, certainly internally, and I think everyone should hear, and that is that yes, this tariff speaks to these cluster 16 provisions, but there is a while before cluster 16, and I think we're doing a fair amount of reasonable guessing at this point. What we really want to do is see how these processes work with cluster 15, how fast we can do these things, where we've created, I don't know, false positives or false negatives or any artificial hurdles or anything that need more time or less time, and really re-enhance the timing aspects of these, before cluster 16. So certainly don't think we're locked in for a process that'll happen much more quickly, 2 years down the road. Okay, moving on. These look struck, but really they were moved, as we said earlier, to be in a more precise section. As some noted that there's still, this will be the deliverable option projects, but also a merchant option project that somehow doesn't require ADNUs. It could be a possibility. Rather than repeating this over and over, I simply kind of generalized the provisions because they're still falling under this 8.9 header. So that's what you're seeing here. Again, not a big substantive policy change and something that's in the proposal, but just trying to make the language a little better. Let's see, there were calls here for a little more language to make things a little more clear on the deliverability from non-participating TOs. And remember, a non-participating TO, unlike a non-load serving entity, is an actual specific flavor of being a kind of CAISO transmission owner. We're really talking about not those completely external entities or even EIM entities, but we're talking about a tariff term for non-participating TO like CCSF and Silicon Valley Power. There are some that using the CAISO controlled grid that are non-participating TOs. When their interconnection customers are asking for deliverability, they'll be under the the same process that we see here. And so just making that a little more clear that they're going to submit an interconnection request in the window to be screened and studied with the CAISO interconnection customers. This isn't, let's see, removing that option is just making it more modernized to, what are the rights and responsibilities above. I think someone noted that, I don't know if this is actually true from the version I grabbed or just, oops, an issue from the Order 2023 filing, but, off-peak network upgrades were terms that were removed, so just cleaning this up a little better. Same thing here. No real change. There weren't many comments other than saying, oops, you had some off-peak network upgrades slip through. Oh, this, let's see, section 14.3 is a little different, although I didn't go through the trouble of adding back language that had previously struck. But this section actually is about construction rights, almost like, whether they're standalone network upgrades or whether the PTO is building them or the interconnection customer, a third party. I think in the effort to change names and also capture what happens with LDNUs and ADNUs for merchant option projects, accidentally touched the section about who builds the upgrades, and so didn't intend to change rights there, and so restored some of the language that was struck. I think only 1 or 2 comments noted that. So yeah, you guys were correct, and I've fixed that. Let's see, moving on to, this is now the score sheet, as it were, for Appendix 2. There were a few comments on interconnection customers indicating that they expect points from a load serving entity. It's like, yes, the tariff says, and policy says, and what's going to happen is the load serving entity is providing its points, and that's what matters, kind of regardless of what an interconnection customer puts here. However, it's a very quick process going to be for us and the load serving entity to match up interconnection customers and load serving entities and make sure, like, you meant this project, yes, this one, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's still significant value in the interconnection customer saying, yes, I'm expecting points from a load serving entity. We've added a box too, you can even tell us the name of that load serving entity may receive points. But I've added language here to say, this won't be binding. You're not, this isn't, we're not going to fine you for perjury, or you're not going to be like, this isn't going to be, you're not going to be pinged for validation or incompleteness if you mark this wrong or don't mark this and get points or don't get points. Really, if you mark this, it's really just trying to help us line these things up. Look, we want to make sure that we're looking for those customers that expect points. Rather, if you mark C and don't expect points, we won't be looking for it. So that's the idea there, and just tried to, assuage concerns that no one's going to be penalized if if those points don't materialize in the way that you thought they would on your interconnection request form.
A couple hands, thank you. Oh, just one hand, thank you.
Okay.
Let's go to Michael.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Freeman, Southern California Edison. Sorry to take us back, but back to Virginia's comment on 6.7.2.2. Bill, you had mentioned that parties couldn't change their deliverability status, but it looks like subsection E or F. This says, I'll wait to get there. So yeah, I guess the new F, it says change in deliverability status to energy only, PDS or a PCDS or a lower fraction of PCDS. I mean, within the customer engagement window and during the scoring window, like, would there be an instance where we could be, a LSE could be scoring a project that they think is fully deliverable, but then they somehow switch to energy only and go down a different track? Am I reading that right? Or kind of playing that scenario out?
I think yeah, let's just both agree on this, that, yeah, that we probably need to think about this one as well. Certainly, I don't know why anyone would want to go through the deliverable screening procedures just to switch to EO. I guess, to escape the EO scoring process if they want cash reimbursement, but I don't know, that seems very remote. But yeah, maybe this one too needs to change to within the 10 days before, rather than the end of a customer engagement window. Because yeah, ultimately it's like what your elections are when we start the screening process is how you're going to be screened, and how at least your cluster study results are going to be. So yeah, let me think about. Let me take this one back.
Okay, no worries, and thanks for the consideration. And I guess just overall like theme is just like, if an LLC is in the scoring process, and like, making sure like nothing material of the project is changing. Obviously, understanding that as you start actually looking into things may need to change a little bit on the margin. But I think as an LLC going into the scoring process, we want to make sure our points are going to what we believe is a project that we're actually scoring. Thanks for that. Thanks, Bill.
That makes sense.
We have a hand from Susan.
Hi, I guess I'm not sure I quite understand that whole discussion. If it turns out that you get study results, for example, let's say you have very expensive LDNU or something like that, and you decide to proceed as energy only. This doesn't change that election, does it? I mean, you're still able to do that later based on study results, right?
That's a good question, whether late EO conversions from deliverable is still an option. I mean, from a tariff perspective, I think that is, but let me think through.
Well, it's not really fair to say that you have no study results, you make an election based on what you hope will work, and then you get actual study results. The first time you see study results, you're not allowed to change. Right now, you can go from to EO even after the phase 2 study, as long as you keep your responsibility for upgrades that that even at that late date, unless they're not needed anymore, which would relieve you of that cost. So it just seems like if you're having to make these elections and then you finally get study results, which is supposed to provide you for the basis of making important decisions like that, and then you're not allowed to change at that point, you're stuck with a very expensive upgrade, you and anybody else who might be sharing responsibility for it. It just seems like that just because the LSE, I understand that they want to keep everything the same maybe after this point, but I just don't see why once you actually get study results you're not allowed to act on them. That seems, other than withdrawing from the queue, that just seems counterproductive.
I understand your point, and certainly you're right in describing the status quo. However, I think now with the screening provisions, there's a real fairness question of allowing someone to be in one track and then having not gone and been screened with the other projects who knew what they wanted from the start and were studied a certain way to switch. So let me take this idea of switching to EO later back, and we'll think about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fairness aspect too between people having to guess before even receiving a study, then getting a study, and then you either have to withdraw or you're stuck with whatever you elected at the front when you had no information. Just that seems very unfair as well.
I mean, I would push back on that a little. I think projects can make a pretty informed decision on whether they want to be deliverable or energy only. Like those have very different competitive options, and
Yeah.
currently today everyone is designed to be deliverable. So, but let me think about it. I understand.
Okay, appreciate that, because there is a fairness aspect on both sides. I agree, but this is a very important to take the flexibility away from the developer once they actually get a study result. I mean, why are you even doing studies, right? I mean, you're supposed to be able to do something with it. So I think that's just very important as far as optionality.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
We have another hand from Virginia.
I said let me think about it, but we will all be thinking about it. I'm just a lawyer. Me is a metaphor here. Okay. I'm sorry,
Virginia, do you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Virginia, I was a Southern California Edison. Yeah, I mean, I see what Suzanne is saying, but on the other hand, you know, like from the LSE perspective, I mean, when we give points to a project, it's to meet certain procurement needs that come online at a certain date. And so, you know, pushing, you know, going from an EO and then pushing the COD, then past maybe certain mandate, that would be, you know, that would be obviously detrimental to us because we would put points on a project that is not coming online when we think it would be. So I just wanted to bring that up as you are reflecting on this issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yelena, were there comments in the chat that we haven't addressed? I didn't realize not everyone could, you know, raise their hand or get on the call. So if there's anything there that we haven't addressed, you know, let me know.
I don't know if that one got answered. Oh, we have a hand from Fernando right now.
Hi, good morning. Fernando Cornell with Southern California Edison. I had just more, I was waiting to ask this question because it's more globally here in terms of the applicability of some of these rules and how they relate into potential changes to PTO's WDATs or wholesale distribution access tariffs. And my question, Bill, is with respect to the zonal 150% threshold or the cap and the inclusion of WDAT interconnection requests that will be bumped up against that 150% limit. I know that in the Appendix DD that we have the section 9.3 that talks about the applicability of the rules from a interconnection request that comes in through the transmission owners to have some kind of a request for deliverability and how they would be treated through the KISOS process and studied for that purpose. But I had submitted this, I think, a request to the KISO team, but just want to raise it during this call. And was wondering if it makes sense to kind of replicate something similar language in Appendix KK that would explicitly indicate that the process that is envisioned in KK would include the wholesale distribution or the customer seeking deliverability through the transmission owners to come up and have that total. I'm getting tongue twisted. To have that total amount of deliverability accounted for in the 150% cap per zone is what I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my request is, would it make sense to have something similar to section 9.3 of Appendix DD replicated in KK to account for the WDAT customers that would be seeking deliverability and it would be going through the scoring model?
I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, 9.3 is repeated in Appendix KK. You're simply not seeing it here because you know, here you're only seeing those provisions in Appendix KK that are being revised. But I think, yeah, like the WDAT, Yelena, this call is only going till 10:30, right?
Yeah, we're at time, but we can go over a little bit.
Okay, so ultimately WDATs is, you know, a question for like a whole nother call, both I think, you know, for how that's going to work for cluster 15, what the PTOs still have pending from WDAT customers that have been coming into their queues and asking for deliverability since cluster 15 got paused. And then also, you know, it's a question for what the PTOs are going to do and how they're going to revise their WDATs, you know, going into cluster 16 to, I guess, incorporate the screens or have this work. I mean, all this to say is, which I think, you know, we should have this conversation, I guess, among the PTOs. But I do want, you know, as we go into those issues, but yeah, I will clarify that 9.3 is also in Appendix KK and will, you know, function for those projects, right? But the so rest assured there. But yeah, the how is a much longer call.
Yeah, because this is, we're talking about that the intake stage or the intake process versus when you're actually looking to find ways to study for deliverability and the allocation process, which is further down the road. So I appreciate the clarification. Look forward to seeing, I guess, the 9.3 being repeated in KK. And then if there's no need for a follow-up call with the PTOs, we'll be glad to participate. Just want to make sure that that's somehow addressed explicitly.
Yeah, and 9.3 is already, you know, filed in a KK in the order 2023 compliance filing. But the 9.4, non-participating TO section has a lot more kind of detail because we don't have that flow of with the PTOs, so it had more provisions that needed to be revised because we need to get that information from the interconnection customers themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I don't want to go over, so if there are no other calls, I'll thank everyone for your time, and I'll repeat, my note that we'll repost these next week, and if anything occurs to you, new, old, whatever, or there's something you feel that we weren't addressing and should have, please feel free to reach out to me directly, or someone from the team can also forward it. All right, well, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your week, and hopefully stay cool this weekend. Thanks.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Inteller Events. You may now disconnect.